Florida, right? Florida. So it's still showing you which bank issued it. If you look at the currency in your pocket today, it doesn't have a bank name on it. It says the Federal Reserve on it. So that's a change. It says Federal Reserve Bank, but it doesn't say Bank of America or Wells Fargo. So it's not connected with a private bank. It's connected with a central bank. Okay, next thing, part 4, is capital requirements. They were worried, remember, about wildcat banking, about the fact that there were all these crazy banks that had been created in states where there were really lax requirements, and they needed money to help finance the Civil War. So the capital requirements are part of that. The capital requirements varied. You guys are chatty today. The capital requirements varied depending upon the population. If the bank was in a city that had a population of more than 50,000, you had to have $200,000 to start the bank. Between 6 and 50, you had to have $100,000 to start the bank. And less than 6, you had to have $50,000 to start the bank. 1/3 of those dollar amounts had to be held in U.S. bonds, which means that if you want to start a bank and you are in, let's put you in a big city. If you're in a big city and you and some friends want to start a bank, first off, you've got to have $200,000 between you in order to start the bank. You're going to take that in those dollars. So that's a whole lot. That's not $200,000 today, which is a lot of money today. That's $200,000 back then. You're going to take that $200,000 and a third of it, what's that? About $67,000. You're going to take about a third of it and use that third to purchase U.S. government bonds. That is, you're going to lend at least 1/3 of that $200,000 to the federal government, which needs to borrow the money from you because they need to finance the Civil War. So this is part of how we're going to finance the Civil War out of this thing. Then you could issue banknotes so those national banknotes I just showed you, the dollar amount of national banknotes that you, the bank owner, could issue was 90% of the face value of the bonds. So you started 200,000 capital, 1/3 was about 67,000. And then, 90% of 67,000 is about $60,000. So you start with $200,000 of your own money. If you only use a third of that to buy government bonds, then you could issue about $60,000 in currency. If you want to issue more than $60,000 in currency, then you've got to buy more bonds. So, and there was no limit. You could take all $200,000 and use all $200,000 to buy bonds, but that would be kind of dorky because then you wouldn't have the $200,000 as a cash cushion. Okay. Fifth, reserve requirements. The other concern about the wildcat banking had been the instability of the banking system as a whole, that people didn't have any confidence that a bank would continue to exist beyond Thursday. And so they came up with this reserve requirement system where every bank had to have, as we have today, they had to have a certain share of their, not just deposits, but deposits and the banknotes they'd issued, held in another financial institution. It's a little different than how it works today. So today, banks have to have a share of total deposits. Then banks had to have a share of deposits and the banknotes that they had issued. So if they had issued 50,000 in banknotes and they had 40,000 deposits, then the reserve requirements are calculated as a percentage of the sum, 50 plus 40. They had to hold those reserves not as deposits, electronic deposits in the Federal Reserve Bank, because there was no Federal Reserve at this point. They had to hold them as cash in the vault, their own vault, plus deposits at a national bank in what was designated as a redemption city. And so the government designated a bunch of cities. How many? 16. 16. The government designated, 17 cities, New York City plus 16 more, as redemption cities. And so those were the larger cities in 1863. What's interesting is the location of the Federal Reserve Banks today, which dates to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, are a subset of these cities that were chosen in 1863. So they choose the big cities in 1863. 16 big cities plus New York makes one more for 17, New York City. And those are the places where banks can hold their reserves. How much reserves? Well, it depended upon who you were. So if you were a redemption city bank, so if you are a bank in one of those New York City plus 16 other cities, if you're in one of those 17 places, then you had to hold 25% of your deposits plus notes as reserves. If you were anybody else, so they called them country banks, but a country bank just means every other location. So if you were any place other than those 17 cities, you had to have 15% of notes plus deposits held in reserve. Where did you hold them? Ready? If you're a country bank, you had to have 2/5 of your reserves held in your own cash vault. The other 2/5 were in deposits in your redemption city national bank. So if you had a bank in Albany, California, you'd be a country bank. A country bank had to have 15% reserves. You would have 2/5 of that, about 6% or more of your total deposits plus notes in your cash in your vault, and the remaining 9% or so are going to be in a San Francisco bank. If you are a redemption city bank but not New York, so redemption city, not New York City. If you're a bank in San Francisco, if you're a bank in Kansas City or St. Louis or Chicago, so if you're in a redemption city, so that's not New York City, then you had to keep at least half of your reserves as cash in your vault, because the reserves that you have are reserves on deposits, and the deposits in the redemption city banks include the reserves of the country banks. So the country banks are putting their reserves as deposits in the redemption city banks. And so the redemption cities have to have larger reserve requirements, 25%. And they got to keep a whole bunch more as cash, half, because it's the banks that may come and ask for withdrawals. And the other half has to be in a New York City bank. And if you're a New York City bank, there is nobody above you. There's no central bank. The last central bank went away in 1836. This is before the Federal Reserve era. So we have no central bank. What we have is the banks in New York City. And so if you're a bank in New York City, you're holding in your bank the deposits of the redemption city banks, which themselves are holding the deposits of the country banks. And so if you're a New York City bank, you have to have 25% reserves held all in cash in the bank. If you are a bank robber, where do you want to go? New York City, because that's where all the cash is. Now what happens? The problem, this creates some soundness to the system, because now if there begins to be some failure in a bank, at least if there's a run on the bank, the country bank can go to the redemption city and withdraw some of its reserves from the redemption city and meet some of the demands from the depositors who are worried about the safety of their deposits. But the problem with this system is there's no lender of last resort. There's nobody who can save the system if there's a panic that starts in a country bank and spreads to the redemption city banks, because the people out in the country are saying, oh my God, the sky's going to fall, the banks are all closing, we're going to lose all our funds, run, get your money out of the bank. People go, they try to get their withdrawals from the country banks go into the redemption city and say, oh my God, all these people are coming to the bank, trying to get the money out, we need these withdrawals from the redemption city. So then the redemption city banks, they're in trouble because they're having to give back the funds to the country banks that nobody has 100% reserves. And so then the redemption city banks, they're going to New York City, their voices drop even further. And the whole system can come crashing down, and did periodically. So we had crises. So they set up the system, but then we had panics and financial crises, 1873, 1883, 1893. Why it's always ending in 3, I don't know. It's just a weird thing. 1907, And at the end of the 1907 crisis, there's finally a push for having a lender of last resort, which becomes the Federal Reserve. Let me show you a couple of charts and figures and so on. Table 10 from the handout for this week shows you the number of banks. You can see here the increase in the number of national banks, the decrease in the number of state banks. A lot of the banks in the 1863, 64, 65 period are simply switching charters. So it's not like the state banks go out of business. It's that the owners of the state bank go and apply for a national charter and switch their charter from a state to a national charter. But then look at what's happening later. It's kind of interesting, right? The number of state banks starts to increase and eventually is going to outstrip the number of national banks. In fact, here's a picture that shows the same thing. Good, the green shows. So we have initially, as a result of the State Bank Act, this reversal, right? So people switch their charters from state to national banks. We get an increase in the number of national banks, and we have a really low number of state banks. But then things start to happen. It increases, and then it really starts increasing here after the crisis of the 1880s. They figure out how to get around the note requirement. Before the mid-1870s, if you were a customer and you went to the bank to borrow money, you go in, you do the paperwork, you sign, blah, 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 they're going to loan you $500. They're going to peel off $500 in national banknotes, in currency. That's how they're going to give you the loan. They're going to give you $500 in national banknotes. Today, if you go down to the bank and you want to borrow money, do they give you currency? They increase the balance in your checking account. Or they cut you a check that's signed over to both you and the UC Regents, depending on what you're doing, right? So now when they make a loan, there's not currency that floats around, it's checks. Take out a student loan, you make it, I don't know, I will know this in 3.5 years, I don't know it yet. When you take out a student loan, does the money come to you or does it go direct to the university? I missed what the answer was. What's the answer? So some of it winds up transferred to you and some goes to the university. Okay, but it's not coming to you in the form of currency, right? It's in your checking account. So checking accounts didn't always exist. You know, it's easy to believe that everything that exists today always existed. No, checking accounts didn't always exist. They figure out checking accounts in the late 1870s. Somebody comes up with the idea that is now checking accounts and says, whoa, we can get around this silly rule that the feds have put in place. Instead of having currency as a way that we give people funds, why don't we come up with this thing, I don't know, what do we call it? Let's call it a checking account. They didn't actually call it demand deposits, but today we call it checking account. And that'll be a way that we give people the funds from a loan, and then they can write this pay to the order of whomever, and we'll honor that piece of paper and transfer the funds to that person. That means that no longer is it important for a bank to be able to issue national banknotes. A bank can be in the business of making profit because they make profit by making loans simply by offering checking deposits. And so now we get a big increase in the number of state banks and not so much of an increase in the number of national banks. The reasons I'll show you in just a second. Maps first. Where are the banks? 1850s. I showed you this map before. Most of the banks at this point in 1850 are concentrated in New York and New England, so the Northeast, some scattered around here. By 1880, we've got banks that are throughout the upper Midwest and the Northeast, but still 1880, relatively few banks in the South. 1880 panel is here once again. By 1910, we basically have banks everywhere. But lots of banks here. There's Iowa's covered with lots of little banks, lots and lots of banks in all those little counties in Iowa. Okay. What's the advantage to a state charter? Why would banks want a state charter? Easier rules. The capital requirement was lower. They didn't have to start out with as much cash if they wanted to start a bank. The reserve requirements were lower. They didn't have to have 15% set aside as reserves. They didn't have to have as much vault cash, so the amount that had to be held in the vault was lower. The supervision was less, so they didn't have the sort of excessively anal federal supervisors coming and checking on the bank books. They had fewer restrictions on their lending, so they had more opportunities as to what they could do with their loans. And in particular, national banks couldn't make loans on farm real estate. So one of the bans is that national banks could not make real estate loans until 1913. So if you were a bank that wanted to make loans to somebody who was, for instance, buying a farm, or buying a house, you couldn't do that if you had a federal charter. Only state banks were allowed to lend to people who wanted to buy farms or wanted to buy houses until 1913. So there's definite advantages to having a state charter. Once they get this check thing figured out as a workaround around the national note process, you get that surge in the number of state banks. They can't issue the national banknotes, but they can issue deposits. A couple more charts really, really fast. Bank deposits are rising. So this is 1860 to 1895, 95, 96. So we get the increase in the amount of banknotes, both state and national banknotes. Real estate loans as a share of the total. So you see that basically with the national banks, they're not making real estate loans. It's the state banks that are making the real estate loans. Until national banks are allowed to do so in 1913. I already talked about the threat of bank panic, so I'm not going to do that. The Federal Reserve is established in 1913 as a way of trying to stabilize the banking system, to serve as an agent for the United States Treasury, and importantly, it's given not a 20-year but a permanent charter. So the mistake that had been made with the first and second banks of the United States in the antebellum period was they were given 20-year charters. Congress does anything, like assault weapons bans, for a limited period of time, and then they got to redo it. They never redo it, right? So give it a permanent charter. You don't have to redebate it every 10, 20, or 30 years, and it'll continue into perpetuity. The location of the Federal Reserve banks follows the redemption cities. There were 16 redemption cities plus New York City. There are 12 Federal Reserve districts, and the lines for the Federal Reserve districts, which for instance the 12th district is huge, and added here also Hawaii and Alaska. These lines are drawn in 1913, so they're a reflection of where's the locus of economic activity 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there were not very many people living out here in the West relative to the East. And so you get relatively small districts back east. Here's the number 1 district is New England. The number 2 district is simply New York, as opposed to the 12th district, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 states. Commencement speaker this year will be John Williams, who's the president of the San Francisco Fed. And so who knows, he may talk about the complaints they have about how big the 12th district is. Hopefully he'll talk about something else. Dennis. Can they not increase the number of districts? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because it would certainly make some sense, right? So to redraw these lines. And I don't know. Institutions are moribund. They move slowly. All right. Oh, 5 minutes. All right, only you go too slow. This is the picture that's in your slides. This is the same picture, but extended a little bit longer. And it's showing in both cases the number of banks. And the thing that I want to point out, first off, the number of state banks is more than the number of national banks. But in both cases, the peak year in terms of the number of banks is not 1929. The number of banks in this country peaks in 1920. The decade of the 20s, we're getting to the 20s here pretty quickly. The decade of the 20s, throughout the 20s, banks are failing. They fail much more rapidly, 1929 to 1933. But bank failures, that's not something that's simply about 1929 to 33. It's not simply the Great Depression. Bank failures are throughout this period, 1920s. A lot of the reason for the bank failures 1920 to 1929 has to do with agricultural distress. During World War I, farmers were encouraged to take on a lot of debt. These are farmers. So they're going to be borrowing largely from which? State or national banks? State banks, because the national banks can't make real estate loans. They can't lend to the farmers. So the farmers are encouraged during World War I to move to a single crop system as opposed to having both corn and wheat and barley and so on their farm. And they're encouraged to take on a lot of debt because we need a lot of food to feed the troops. The debt that the farmers take on in the World War I period, which is 1916, 17, 18, that sort of period, it looks like a not altogether stupid idea to take on all of this debt in the late 19 teens because the food prices had been going up in the teens. However, food prices fall in the 1920s. And because the farmers had taken on lots of debt in the teens, and then they experienced declining prices for their crops in the 1920s, and there's also drought, there's all sorts of other problems going on, the farmers can't get enough revenue to pay back the loans that they have taken out from the state banks. And that leads to a large number of bank failures, particularly in the Midwest states, amongst these state banks that had made loans on agricultural real estate during the boom years around World War I. David Wheelock, who is at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, economic historian working there. Economic historians get jobs at all the Federal Reserve banks and the Federal Reserve Board. We're very proud of that. David Wheelock, who's at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, studied bank failures in Kansas. And this is an article in your reader for this week. I have 2 minutes. I can do some of this in 2 minutes. David looked at bank failures, and he wanted to know, did deposit insurance increase the bank failures? Was it the case that banks that were insured against failure, so that if the bank fails, that people can go and rely upon the deposit insurance, FDIC is what we have today, and get back their deposits from the bank? Were the banks that were insured likely to take on more risk, make riskier loans, and therefore fail more often? It's an asymmetric information problem. Once the banks had the insurance, we should just mention one of those economic concepts. Once the banks had the insurance, did that generate an incentive for moral hazard where the banks would change their behavior and make riskier loans, increasing the likelihood that the bank would then go into default and fail? So what David does is David controls for the amount of agricultural distress in an area. I should use his last name because there's too many Davids in this class. Not amongst you, but amongst the authors. Something about your name, David, to become an economic historian. First or last name. What Wheelock does, that's better. What Wheelock does is he controls for agricultural distress and asks whether or not the insured banks fail more. Let me show you the pictures, and we'll look at the econometrics on Tuesday. Here's the pictures. So this is a picture that shows you, oh good. These pictures, these are the ones from his book, but I do a little bit of tweaking to this so you can see more clear from his article, so you can see more clearly what he's doing. So figure 1 is showing you what's the bank failure rate. This is by county in Kansas, 1920 to 1926. I colored things in so that you could see it more easily. So the purple color, those are the counties, these are counties. Why are these such straight lines? Because of surveying, and the surveying started with the North Ordinance. Why is this not a straight line up here? Why is this county up here not have straight lines? Amen. Good job. All right. So these are counties. Purple is really high failure rate. Blue is moderate failure rate. 0 is like this. And the non-shaded ones are small but not enormous. Then he looks at what's the change in the value of land and buildings. Notice that most of these are negative, right? This is not farms that are increasing in value. These farms are decreasing in value because the farm prices are going down. So here's the same county. So the colors, these colors are the same colors from the first map. So I'm just going to take the colors from the bank failure map and lay them on top of the other ones. So if the change in land and building value was a 1-to-1 match, then the purple counties would be the lowest, the worst counties in terms of loss of value, and the blue would be the moderate. So you're trying to see whether or not there's a 1-to-1 match. There's a little match. Yeah, it's a, kind of, sort of, maybe there, maybe not. Then he looks at percentage change in farmland. So how much of a change in the number of acres farmed was there? Here again, the purple and the blue. Blah, that one doesn't work out very well because we've got the loss of farmland over here in the west, and those are neither purple nor blue. We got some purples that are in the medium, the small category. That's not working out very well. Ratio of insured banks to total banks. So the numbers are by county. The higher the number of banks per county that are insured, the crosshatches are the ones that have 75% or more of the banks have the insurance. Claim like this is less than 25%. And here again. So there's not a 1-to-1 correspondence between the colors, which is from figure 1, and any of these determining variables, and that's why you have to use the econometric analysis to tease out what's really determining the failure rate. We'll start with the econometric analysis on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the weather. Should be good today and tomorrow.